You know, there's so much to do with back work because there's so many different situations that come up that it seems like there's never a dull moment about learning about what to do with various backs. So I have gotten an email from somebody who does work in the field who had a question about very hard muscles when they're massaging, and they're very hard muscles and they feel like they just don't release. Sometimes it's because they've been bulked up a lot and there's just a lot of tone to them, probably sometimes overtone, and sometimes they're full of fluid, so it's good to drain it out, and oftentimes the softening of the muscle will occur by opening up the lymphatic system and allowing for the fluid to get out of the muscle tissue. That will help also to soften it up. Otherwise, the other way to do it is to just be sure that you go very slowly into it and wait for that muscle to voluntarily, on its own, relax. Because if it's forced into, the more force you're going to do to try to get that muscle to relax, the more it's going to push back on you, and you're just going to be fighting with it until the physiology of the muscle doesn't have any more triggering chemicals to be able to tense that muscle in, and then muscles go into what's called muscle failure. It's going to feel like it releases, but once the body builds back up the spent chemicals and the spent things, then you're going to have the same situation again. So that's little hints about the really hardness of a muscle, of how to let it go. I'm a real advocate, as those of you who followed these videos for a while know, I'm a real advocate to lighter work. And I have seen some comments on there like the lighter work is just fluffy. Well, some lighter work is fluffy. If you don't know what you're doing and you're just playing with the skin, then yeah, it's not going to be a good massage. But if you know the anatomy well and you know how to direct the energy into a muscle and you know how to feel for what you're feeling for, the light work is far superior, in my opinion, than real deep forced work. I just see a lot more results that are much more impacting and much more permanent on the situations where the body is being respected and not forced to change. So with that, there's a few things I'll probably be telling you. One of the things that you want to remember when you are working with massage therapy is you don't want to work directly on the vertebrae. In between the vertebrae is fine, but you don't want to work on the bone itself. Now here I am on the bone, but I'm doing a sacral pull. I'm doing a cranial technique and a sacral pull technique. My other hand is up at the neck, and I'm actually accessing the dural tube. And I'm allowing for a little bit of traction going towards the feet and towards the head, depending on where my hand is at, so that there's a stretch with that dural tube. And I can feel any unwinding there, but that's a different technique. With massage therapy, it's really good idea to go on either side of the vertebrae, and a lot of times that's not done enough. There's maybe a little bit of work for that, but there's so much attachment that comes through there. There's so much movement that happens in there, and the muscles are tiny, and there's a lot of them, and they deep in that bone, and a lot of connective tissue in there. So to work not only right next to the vertebrae, but if you want to get a little bit deeper into it, there's a technique where once you soften the top, then the top muscles, the more superficial muscles, if you go in like so, and you kind of feel yourself going alongside that vertebrae, you're dropped down to another layer of muscle, and then you give a little traction outward going in that direction, and you feel like you're going underneath the muscle. Now there's not a lot of pressure with this either, but there's a little more pressure than on the top muscle, but it's still not a lot. It's inviting you in. You're not pushing your way in. You're being invited in. So there's another little hint to do, and doing it from the top down is a little bit different action than doing it from the bottom up. So you can also come into that and work it from the bottom up. That opens up the vertebrae just a little bit different because of the shape of the vertebrae and the way that they're positioned. So that's another one. And then because the erector spinae muscle is a little bit wider, it's also good to go to the belly of the muscle and get into that. And this is another area that I oftentimes find when I do get massages that is somewhat overlooked. Another thing that I will give a hint out for therapists particularly, or even those of you that are working on your family or friends, you want to go from the origins to insertions, or from end to end of the muscle. The origin is where the muscle is attached to the bone, and the insertion is the part of where it's attached to the bone that's more movable. And going from one side of the muscle to the other side all the way is much more satisfying for the person on the table than if I were to just kind of go down this far and then just like quit. It's like you're not quite at the end. So that's a little bit irritating as well to feel. It's not complete. It's not masterful work. It's work that's taking shortcuts, and kind of a lazy therapist would want to be incomplete. And here, so this basically today is I'm showing you a lot of spine work. Spines are real important. Obviously, you know what it's like to have back pain. And if we keep the muscles supple and keep everything movable at this level, the need for maybe more radical treatment is not as great. Or if we do need it, it's much easier to hold and stay in a more normal position. Now, if somebody has just had some kind of trauma to the spine, of course you'd want to modify the work a little bit until it gets better. There's a broken spine or bad vertebrae or bad discs or something like that going on, then of course you'd need to modify the work. So it is important to understand what different conditions do, how they act, how their face is, if you will. But it's not really that important, in my opinion, to really understand what's going on to a deep level. Just understand how it's going to be if you do the work on it. You don't have to go into a lot of other stuff other than just being enough familiar with it so that you're not going to cause any more harm to the body and cause any more thing for the body to deal with than what's already happening. And I guarantee if you do your work right, and the person on the table has a desire and an intention to get better, the body will perform that way. But you have to respect the body in order to do that. And I also like to think of it that as we learn that healing comes in respecting the body, that's going to translate into everything else in our life. We're going to start to see that we respect other things as well too. Because if we don't respect our own selves and our own bodies enough to take care of them, we can't expect to have any respect for anything else. Our number one responsibility is our body. It's not the government's job. It's not really even your doctor's job. It's your job to be educated. Let's turn the tide on this, and let's begin to take care of one another in a meaningful way, and let's change this medical business from one of extracting on people's ignorance a lot of funds, or one where we just basically don't have to buy this notion that we have to be sick and full of disease. So with that, this was some spine work, and I hope you got something out of it. If you have questions, please email me. Thank you so much. This is Athena Jezik in Austin, Texas.